Hello everyone, my name is Rachel Berg and I'm here to talk to you about the edTPA, specifically task 1. So I recently just wrote the edTPA and submitted it and passed it. So I'm here to give you my insight, some guidance into starting and working on task 1 of the edTPA. Now I will say that I did my edTPA in secondary English, so my edTPA is probably going to look much different than someone who's doing their edTPA in a childhood classroom or even a special ed classroom. So just bear that in mind that not everything I did will be on your edTPA, but these are some more generic tips and tricks to help you get through task 1. So I have this whole list of stuff we're going to talk about today. I'm going to try to do them quickly. But yeah, let's get started. So first things first is read your handbook. Now what I did, since I'm really organized, I like to be really organized anyway, I made an entire binder. I put all of the resources in this binder. I have tabs in here such as the handbook. I have all the rubrics. I have all of the instructions for each task in here, and also other tabs to put research and theory in there as well. So I really stress looking at the handbook, whatever edTPA you're going to do. I suggest downloading the handbook and reading it while you are student teaching. Now that might seem a little weird, but it'll make sense because say you wrote your entire learning segment and you recorded yourself in your student teaching placement, and then you're done student teaching and you go look at the handbook and you realize you didn't record the right thing. That's probably not going to be good for you. So that's why I suggest you read this first before you do anything. Read your handbook very first thing. All right, and then the next thing is to prepare your learning segment during student teaching. So your learning segment, depending on your edTPA, should be about 3 to 5 lessons in a specific content area. Mine was in English. So I did 5 lessons that it asks for them to be 3 to 5 consecutive hours. Mine probably totaled about 3.5, 4 hours of instruction because my class periods were 45 minutes long. So you just need to make sure you do this sort of early in your student teaching, just so you're aware that, maybe if you need to make adjustments, you can totally do that and still have time to finish up your recording and finish up your learning segment and your assessments as well. And then you also need to record for task 2 during this time while you're teaching this learning segment. So make sure you read your handbook, like I said, so you know what to record and how to record it for your edTPA, but that will be in later task 2. So right now we're focusing on task 1. All right, and so I'm going to screen mirror with you because I'm getting to the part where I started uploading files to work on the edTPA. So I'm going to show you how I did that. So we are going to share my screen. All right, so I did my edTPA entirely through Google Drive. Now, as you can see, I use Google Drive a lot. And the reason being is I have this horrible fear that if I save all of my materials on my desktop in a folder through Word or something like that, my computer's going to crash one day and then I will have lost all the work I've done. And for those of you who have started the edTPA or have even read the handbook by now, you know that it's a pretty big task and you don't want to lose all that work. So I like Google Drive because it automatically saves everything no matter what. So if your computer crashed, you're exactly at the same spot you were, and you can also access all of this work anywhere you have internet, so it doesn't need to be on a specific computer. So you can just log into your Gmail and get to Google Drive from any device. So yeah, that's my little spiel about Google Drive. I did all of mine in folders, so task 1 is here, task 2 is here, and task 3 is here. All right, so the first things first, task 1, the very first thing you should do, like I mentioned, is plan and write all of your lesson plans for your learning segment. Okay, so and read your handbook again, so make sure you have all the specifications that you're following for those lesson plans. Again, they're different based on which edTPA you're writing. And I will point out that lesson plans for the edTPA are somewhat condensed compared to your Elmira College lesson plans you do for curriculum courses. So for example, here is one of my lessons from the edTPA. Now, as you can see, I don't have the Elmira College logo up here. I don't have my name on here. I don't have the school's name on here. This will be entirely anonymous, so make sure you remove any identifiers from here. But then when you get down to the areas where you're talking about what you're going to be doing, which is stage 3 learning plan and learning tasks, you can see that I have this entire lesson column. I have the names of the instructional strategies I'm using. So this is somewhat of a condensed version of the lesson plan that you're going to be doing, because it'll become a lot more repetitive if you write all of this stuff here, because this name, so like heterogeneous grouping, normally you would identify that heterogeneous grouping is grouping students from different abilities, different backgrounds, things like that. But instead of typing that all out in here, you're going to put that in your planning commentary, which is located in task 1 as well. So that's the whole reason your instructional strategies is just names of the strategies. You will get into those things later when you work on the planning commentary. So this is what a typical lesson would look like for the edTPA. They do have a page limit for lessons. I believe it's 4 pages for each lesson. I try to keep mine at 2 pages just because I didn't want to be super redundant and super repetitive, so I tried to keep mine to a minimum. But depending on what you're teaching, you might have a longer lesson plan or even a shorter lesson plan than I did. So yeah. Also, you need to have your worksheets and instruction materials prepared for all of this, because you have to turn those in as well. So I have a folder actually within a folder, but I have a folder within my lesson plan folder for lesson 1 specifically. So here I have all the pictures that I use for my hook stations, and then I had all the worksheets that the students used in this class and this lesson, and then I also have the PowerPoint the students used as well. So make sure for every lesson you have all of the materials, and you don't have to separate it the way I did. This just is more helpful for me, but this is something that I do suggest if you're more organized and things like that. So yeah, so those are the lessons. And then once you are ready with all of your lessons and once you have all of those figured out, that's when you move on to your context for learning. So basically what the context for learning is who you're teaching, where you're teaching, what you know about your students, what you know about the cultural assets of your community in which you're teaching, et cetera, et cetera. And so in context for learning, you're basically talking about your school demographics, where you're located, what kind of school you're working in, the population of your students, boys versus girls, things like that. And one major thing I will stress about the context for learning and pretty much the entire edTPA itself is you must always avoid deficit language. So what I mean by that is avoid talking down about your students, about the community. So if you live or if you're doing your student teaching in a location that doesn't have a very high socioeconomic status, I wouldn't phrase it that way because that could be seen as deficit language. So what you could say if you wanted to say something like that is something like this. So I'm going to highlight it right here, or at least try to anyway. All right, doesn't look like, oh, there we go. Anyway, but right here, I'll put my cursor under here. 63% of students who attended this school qualify for free or reduced breakfast and lunch, though the school has opted for a free lunch and breakfast for all students enrolled. That is going to be an identifier to the person grading and scoring your edTPA that the location in which you student taught was one that was not of a very high socioeconomic status. And you didn't even have to say that bluntly. So that's a really good thing that you should throw in there. And all of this data I got from the New York State Report Card website. You just type in the school you're working at and it gives you all of this data. So yeah. And then when you get down to here, This is where it kind of talks about the specific class you're featuring in your learning segment. So if your childhood, you have one class, so you're just going to write about that class. But if you're adolescent, you get to choose which class you want to write your edTPA on. I chose my third period class, and the reason I chose my third period class is because they have the most consistent participation rate, and I wanted to be able to showcase that in my videos. So just strategically choose which class you want to use if you have the option to choose. And then down here, you have this chart, and you have to talk about students with IEPs and 504 plans. And then you also have to talk about students with specific language needs and other learning needs if you have those types of students in your classroom. So basically, they give you this chart, and you have examples. So this one here, example visual processing, and then you have, they had 2 students in this class, and the supports and modifications for those 2 students. Now, don't delete those. Just make sure you don't delete those. Anything that they have in there that they don't explicitly say to delete, just leave them. And then you type in what specific disabilities, IEPs, 504 plans you had in that specific class. So for me, I had 3 students with IEPs or 504s. And then I also referred to them as student A, student B, and student C. Again, keeping everything anonymous. You should not or ever say your students' names in the edTPA, but I refer to them as student A in my lesson plans, student B in my lesson plans, and student C in my lesson plans, and also student 3 in assessment commentary work samples. Just make sure every time you're referencing students in this chart, I would give them sort of like a tag, like a student A or a student B, because in the lesson plans, when you have that modification section, I can go back down and show you. But in the lesson plans, when you have the modification and the accommodation section, you can refer to those students in your lesson plan, so that way your context for learning directly reflects your lesson plan. So let me just scroll down real quick and show you what I'm talking about. All right, so right here I have student A, reading disability, as my target student. And then I have student B as my target student for the accommodations, and student C for my target student for the accommodations. And this one I didn't have any modifications, and that's okay if you didn't have any. So yeah, there's that. And let's go back to the context for learning real quick. One more thing about that. I really like Google Docs too, because it's pretty easy to navigate. But then you have students with specific language needs. So these are students who are bilingual. These are students who are learning English as a new language. I didn't have any students who had those specific language needs in my classroom. So I just left this blank. And then I also didn't have any students with other learning needs. So I just left this blank as well. But again, your classroom will be different than mine, so just fill it in accordingly. And that is your context for learning. And then when you talk about your planning commentary, which is the next step, I'll show you what my planning commentary looks like. Your planning commentary contains your central focus of your entire learning segment. Basically, the entire thing you want your students to wrap their heads around. That's what this planning commentary is pretty much about. The very first part is the central focus. And it also contains the standards, the formative assessments you use, the strategies you use. Like I said earlier, just leave those as names in your lesson plans. Planning commentary is where you are going to talk about those specific learning strategies. So yeah, this is where you're going to put the bulk of your writing. As you can see, I have tons and tons of writing in here about how I taught, what I was going to teach, how I was going to teach it, all sorts of different things. And if you can see, there's a 9 of 9 page maximum. Don't ever go past the page maximum, because they won't score it if you go past the page maximum. So, but also try to hit the page maximum as fast as you can, because I've heard that the longer you write, or the more you write rather, the higher score you tend to get. I'm not saying if you write 6 out of 9 pages you won't pass, but I'm saying that you're more likely to do so if you write almost to the maximum, or even to the maximum page count. So, some tips for planning commentary. Like I said, it's basically what you're going to teach, how you're going to teach it, basically reflecting your lesson plans in this planning commentary, and they should directly reflect those lessons. So a lot of people think they just submit a learning segment and then they submit a planning commentary for something entirely different. That's not the case. They have to coincide. They have to be about the same thing. And then one crazy thing that they throw in here, it's not really crazy, but one thing they throw in here is they ask you for principles from research and theory to support your justifications. Now, this is huge. If you don't do that, you don't score as well. And if you look at your handbook, that's why I said read it first. If you look at your handbook, there's tons and tons of rubrics for each section of the edTPA. And if you look at the planning commentary rubrics, there is a section that says, did the student use research and theory to support their justifications? And if you didn't, I believe the highest you can get on that section is either a 2 or a 3, and they're out of 5. So your goal when reading those rubrics is to get 5s and 4s. So yeah, just make sure whenever they ask that you use principles from research and theory to support your justifications. And since we are in the education program, we do use APA when we're citing sources. So make sure you do the APA citation inside the paragraphs and then also at the end within the brackets as well. But yeah, so one last little tip. This goes for pretty much all the edTPA, not just task 1, but one thing that I liked to do was, since this is in Google Docs, you can just send the entire folder to people. And since your professors can't look at your edTPA, it's against the rules, I would suggest having people in your classes, specifically your education classes, also specifically people who are writing the edTPA right now. You might have spent so much time writing this and things just don't seem they just don't seem like they make sense or something. Trust me, when I was writing it, I was like, I don't make any sense. I'm going to send this to my friend who has written the edTPA and passed before, so I'm going to see what she thinks. And that's a really great strategy to help get someone else's opinion on what you can do better and how you can do better. Last tip, don't stress. Take your time. Task 1 is probably the most rigorous. It has a lot that you need to do in there, lots of writing, lots of planning. So take your time with this one. And also I do have a suggestion. If you are one of those people like me who benefit from auditory learning, read what you wrote out loud like you're giving a speech. If it doesn't sound like something you should say in a speech, then I would take it out. So that's my last tip. And I wish you all good luck on your edTPA journey, and I really hope this helped with task 1. Thanks.